So you want to know every survivor ranked from worst to best. Well, guess what? I'm obviously gonna tell you because that's the entire point of this video. Hey guys, my name is Kyle and welcome back to another Dead by Daylight video. In today's video, I already said what we're doing. This is not going well. I'm gonna be ranking every survivor from worst to best. This is solely based on their perks and their perks alone. It has nothing to do with their cosmetics. It has nothing to do with how loud they are, nothing like that. If you want me to do those types of videos, let me know down in the comments below. But for now, we are just sticking to the perks. If you do enjoy this video, feel free to drop a like and subscribe if you're new. Again, I wanted to thank Spirit Walker for being an absolute legend in the legendary category of the members on the server. If anyone else wants to become a member to support me so I can continue making videos like this, feel free to go in the description below where it says become a member here. Anyway, let's get right into the video. Coming into the last place spot on our list, I gotta go with Ash. Ash is just overall such a bad survivor. His 3 perks are Flip Flop, Buckle Up, and Medal of Man, and these are some of the most situational perks ever. Buckle Up is just absolutely garbage, like never ever run it. Medal of Man is only good for Sabo builds, and even then it has so many prerequisites, it's literally like so hard to get. You get it maybe once a game, and that's a big maybe. And then Flip Flop is only good if you pair it with other perks, but just based on it alone, it's a terrible perk. So if you're ever thinking about buying this character, just don't. He's not worth it at all. Next up on the list, we have Steve. I hate to put Steve this low on this list because my guy is literally one of the best characters in Stranger Things, and he's just one of the coolest characters in Dead by Daylight. However, his perks are absolutely atrocious. He has Babysitter, Camaraderie, and Second Wind. Also, if you don't know what any of these perks do, I would recommend going to check out my survivor perk tier list down below or on the top right because I explain every single perk there in depth. The only decent one is Second Wind, and even then it's like a solid D tier or C tier at most. Steve is just it just frustrates me to put Steve this low because he's one of the coolest characters in Dead by Daylight, but his perks are just so bad. Coming up in the 23rd spot on the list, we have Jeff. I think Jeff might be one of the most underused characters behind Ash. His perks are Breakdown, Aftercare, and Distortion. All of them are like really bad. They don't really have any synergy with any other perks to make them stronger, so they just kind of exist. The perks aren't even fun, so like there's 0 point in getting them. Some of the really bad perks like Diversion are just fun to use, but Jeff's perks are just so bad that they're not even fun. Next up on the list, we have Yunjin. If I mispronounce that, I am so sorry. So I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know where to put her because I don't actually own her, so this is purely based on how strong the perks sound. She has Fast Track, Smash Hit, and Self-Preservation, and to be honest, all of these kind of have too many prerequisites before they start doing anything, and I kind of feel like the rewards aren't worth what you have to build up to achieve them. Like for Smash Hit, you have to stun a killer and then it gives you a speed boost, but you could literally just Lithe and then Dumb Tech them and get the same exact thing. Obviously, it's not the same if they have Enduring, but that's a singular perk that barely any killer uses. Next up on the list, we have Detective Tap. So honestly, Tap isn't terrible. He has Tenacity, Detective's Hunch, and Stakeout. Detective's Hunch is the only redeeming quality of him. It basically lets you see all of the objectives on the map every time you complete a generator. This is incredibly good for totem hunting, and a lot of killers nowadays use hex perks, so it can be insanely helpful. But if they aren't using a hex perk, then it pretty much becomes completely useless. Tenacity is it's whatever. You can use it with like a flip-flop power struggle build, but really it's not amazing. And then Stakeout is just the dumbest thing ever. Just there's not even anything to say about it. All right, next up we have Jane. It makes me really sad to put Jane this low on the list because I know everyone loves her, except her perks are not good. She has Solidarity, Poised, and Head On. Head On is extremely fun. It's probably one of the most fun perks in the entire game, but if you really think about it, it's not that good. Yes, it can do all sorts of stuff. It can stun the killer, it can save teammates, it can do all sorts of stuff, but really it's just not good. Like, I'm sorry to say. If you actually think about it, compared to other perks, it's not that good. However, if I was ranking it on the most fun perks, this would definitely be top 5. And then Poised and Solidarity are just really average. Like, they don't really do anything. So if you're going for Jane, everyone knows that it's 4 Head On just to get some satisfying moments. The 19th spot is going to Quentin. I swear, every single Quentin is either incredibly bad and like crouches in the corner and like hides all game, or they're incredibly sweaty and is going for like flashlight saves and CJ techs and all sorts of stuff. Is that just me? Anyway, he has Wake Up, which is awful, Pharmacy, which is meh, and Vigil, which is meh. The reason he's higher than the other survivors is because Pharmacy and Vigil can be paired paired with other perks to make them actually pretty viable. Like you can stack Vigil with other survivors to get a really quick exhaustion perk cooldown, and that can be insanely good. And then Pharmacy can be really helpful if you're using a chest build, and of course that can lead to you getting like keys and stuff just to make an easy escape. Coming into the 18th spot, we have Ace. You know, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I gotta put Ace below Quentin. Ace's perks are also situational like Quentin's and only work with certain builds. They're just slightly worse than Pharmacy and Vigil. We have Open-Handed, which extends your auras, Up the Ante, which increases your luck, and Ace in the Hole. Ace in the Hole is pretty much like Pharmacy, where it's really good for those builds. Open-Handed and Up the Ante are also only able to be used with a very specific build, and they don't even really do much to begin with. Like personally, I have almost 1,500 hours on the game, and I still haven't unlocked Ace because I don't think he's worth it. Next up on the list, we have Elodie. Elodie actually has some pretty fun perks. She has Appraisal, Deception, and Power Struggle. Appraisal is whatever, you can search a chest twice, but Deception and Power Struggle are so fun. Deception is kind of like Diversion, where it's really hard to get it to work, but if you do, it's so satisfying and so hilarious. And Power Struggle is actually incredibly strong with Unbreakable and Flip Flop. It basically makes it so that the killer is forced to slug you, because if he picks you up, you're getting off his shoulders. The 16th spot is going to Adam. Adam's perks are kind of all over the spectrum. We have Diversion, which is really fun but really bad, Deliverance, which is an amazing perk, and then Autodidact, which is an awful perk. So he's mostly up on the list because of Deliverance. That's really good for solo queue and really good for survive with friends. And then Diversion, obviously, it's just so fun. Like, it's just so fun. You gotta add points for Diversion. It's the Pebble perk, like, come on. Coming into the 15th spot, we have Zarina. Zarina's perks are like the Walmart version of other perks. Off the Record is like a scuffed Iron Will, and Red Herring is like a scuffed Deception or Diversion. But then we have the most amazing perk in the entire game, For the People. Obviously, it's nowhere near the best perk in the entire game, but if you pair this with Soul Guard, it is literally one of the best perk combos ever. Like it's so fun, it's so good, it's amazing, it's incredible. It can get you out of so many situations that people don't even realize. It's amazing. If you haven't tried it, try it out with your friends. Obviously, don't do it on solo queue because that won't do anything, but if you have friends, I would definitely recommend it. Perfect transition. If you don't have friends, come join my Discord server. There are people from the Dead by Daylight community looking for other people to play with. Feel free to come join down below. Okay, the next spot is going to Felix. Honestly, Felix's perks are all pretty decent. Visionary is probably the worst, but then we have Desperate Measures and Built to Last. The problem with Felix's perks is I don't think they provide enough value to warrant a perk slot, but they're not bad perks. It's a really confusing middle ground, and I don't really know where to rank him because his perks are pretty good, but there's just so many better options out there. Coming into the 13th spot, we have Yui. Yui would probably be way lower on this list if it weren't for the Lucky Break buff. People underestimate the power of Lucky Break, even with its nerf after the PTB. It hides all of your scratch marks and blood when you're injured for 45 seconds. That is so good. Do you realize how good that is? If a killer is chasing you and they completely lose you, that wastes so much of their time. Because if you think about it, that means 3 other people are doing objectives, hopefully, unless you're in solo queue where everyone does absolutely nothing. But assuming you have a team with a couple of brain cells, that means 3 out of 4 players are doing something useful. And now the killer doesn't really know where to go because they don't really have any information, and no one gets down, so he doesn't get any pressure. Lucky Break is amazing, and it's completely underrated. And then we have Any Means Necessary, which is pretty bad, but you can lift up pallets, and it's really funny if you do. And then Breakout, which is actually kind of solid. It's a little bit underrated, but it's not really that strong to begin with. But if you're doing a Sambo build, this is practically required because it's actually really good to get people off of the killer's shoulders. Number 12, and it pains me to say it, but it's gotta go to Nia. I am a Nia main, so it hurts my soul to put her this low on the list. But you gotta think about it. Balanced Landing is one of the worst exhaustion perks. Urban Evasion is one of the worst perks in the entire game, and Streetwise is just very average. There's just so many better alternatives to all of these perks. Like Balanced Landing is only good on Haddonfield, but if you're not on Haddonfield, then why wouldn't you run Dead Hard or Sprint Burst? Urban Evasion is just bad in general unless you have a stealthy playstyle, then it's obviously amazing. But for good players, you would never use Urban Evasion like ever. And even if you did want something similar to it, you would just use Fixated because Fixated is like way better than Urban Evasion. And then Streetwise is like a worse version of Built to Last, except it works for everyone else. So if you plan accordingly, yeah, technically it can be better than Built to Last, but you're not going to be, with your teammates the entire game. So she's really average, which is why she's in the middle of the list. All right, the 11th spot is going to Dwight. Dwight's perks are all middle ground. He has Bond, which is really good for seeing where your teammates are. Prove Thyself, which is really good for making gens go a little bit faster, except you need to be coordinated with your team. And then Leader, which is really good for unhooking, cleansing totems, doing all that jazz, but honestly doesn't really do that much so it's not worth a perk slot. I feel like his perks can be okay and they can work with pretty specific builds, but they require a lot of coordination that I don't think a lot of survivors have, so I can't rank him that high on the list. Next up, we have Kate. Kate is an extremely good character to unlock for beginners. She has Dance With Me, Windows of Opportunity, and Boil Over. Boil Over is one of the worst perks in the entire game. Do not use it. It's not good. It does essentially nothing. Dance With Me is okay. If you pair it with Lithe and Quick and Quiet, it can be insanely strong, but that also requires 2 other perks for it to be even useful. But then there's Windows of Opportunity, which is one of the most underrated perks in the entire game. It lets you see the auras of any pallets or windows nearby so you can know where your resources are. This is really good for beginners because they can kind of learn the layout of the loops and stuff, but it's also good for really experienced people to know, especially in solo queue, if your other teammates have used certain pallets. I mentioned this in my perk tier list, but True Talent, who has like 6,000 hours on the game or something crazy like that, still uses Windows of Opportunity because he plays solo queue and it's so good for solo queue. Okay, next up we have Lori. Lori used to be one of the best survivors in the entire game, and then she got nerfed to the ground. Soul Survivor is the worst perk in existence. Literally never ever use this ever. Like it doesn't work with any builds. It's so dumb. And then we have Object of Obsession, which was recently nerfed, and now it's more of a utility perk than like a good perk. It still can be really good, but it's just not as good as it used to be. And then Decisive Strike, which is practically only good in the end game now. I severely underestimated the power of DS when I made the Survivor perk tier list because it had just been nerfed, but honestly, it still holds a bit of power. The only problem with it is it practically won't work at all mid-game to early game because you're going to be doing objectives, which completely mitigates this perk. The 8th spot on the list is going to Claudette. Claudette's perks are alright. She has Self-Care, which is a killer perk, Botany Knowledge, which is okay. You know, you can speed up heals, but there's just much better healing perks out there like We'll Make It. And then we have Empathy, which is extremely good for going for flashlight saves because, you know, you want to see where your injured teammates are. But besides that, it's kind of eh. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be mad about this spot because Claudette is like the go-to character to use. She has Sweaty Skins, and then she has her P3 outfit for all of the stealthy players out there. And she's my second favorite character to use, but her perks are just really not that good. The 7th spot is going to Nancy. Nancy's perks are Better Together, Fixated, and Inner Strength. Better Together is a terrible perk. Don't use it. Fixated can be useful in some situations. It's like a better version of Urban Evasion, but just like Urban Evasion, it's a killer perk if you don't know how to use it correctly. Do not walk around the entire map the entire game. It is the most frustrating thing for both the survivors and the killers. And then we have Inner Strength, which I personally despise. I don't like the idea of it, but it is very unique and it is extremely helpful if you know how to use it properly. And that is just an objective truth. I don't like the perk personally, but it's definitely a strong perk. Coming into the 6th spot, we have Cheryl. Cheryl's best quality is Soul Guard. Soul Guard is on the verge of being a meta perk. It's not quite there yet, but it's still so good if used properly. It's basically like Borrow Time, but for slugging, which happens less than being hooked, so that's why it's not quite in the meta category, but it's still insanely good. And then she has Blood Pact and Repressed Alliance. They're both kind of bad, but can be used in some situations. Like Repressed Alliance can stop a pop from happening, which can be really good and can completely change the tide of the game. The likelihood of it being useful is very little. The 5th spot is going to Fang. Her perks are Technician, Lithe, and Alert. Technician is garbage, but then Lithe and Alert are pretty solid. Lithe is like a mid-tier exhaustion perk. You'd be much better off using Sprint Burst or Dead Hard, but it's still really good for some situations, especially if you pair it with Quick and Quiet and Dance With Me, like I said earlier. And then Alert is probably the most underrated perk in the entire game. It lets you see where the killer is so much that it's really good for information. Next up on the list, we have Jake. Jake has Iron Will, which is probably the best perk in the game. And then he has Calm Spirit, which is pretty trash, and Saboteur, which is also pretty trash unless you're using a sabotage build. Then it's actually very useful, but you can still technically do a sabo build without it. You just have to be a little more aware of where the hooks are. But Jake is worth leveling up alone just for Iron Will because that is such a good perk no matter your playstyle. Before we get into the top 3 survivors, I wanted to let you know that I do have a Twitch and I stream live every Tuesday and Saturday, so feel free to come say hi. Anyway, the 3rd spot is going to David. David has We're Gonna Live Forever, Dead Hard, and No Mither. We're Gonna Live Forever was recently buffed, and now it's actually a pretty solid perk. Most people use it for the extra blood points, but it's actually a really good anti-slugging perk as well. Dead Hard is obviously one of the strongest perks in the entire game when it works, and No Mither is a joke. It's a literal garbage can. It's a can of worms. It's so useless. The second place spot is going to Bill. Bill has Left Behind, which is one of the most selfish perks in the entire game, and it's terrible, and never ever use it. I'm begging you. But then he has Borrowed Time, meta perk, Unbreakable, meta perk. 2 meta perks in a single character is so good. It's so good. And both of these perks are so good. Borrowed Time is incredibly useful and can get you out of so many situations. And then Unbreakable is really good for anti-slugging, which generally happens a lot, especially if you have DS. Slugging is one of the most useful killer strategies when used properly, and Unbreakable completely mitigates that. And finally, the best survivor, the one that you should level up first, is going to Meg. I'm pretty sure that every experienced survivor agrees on this. Meg is just the most overall well-rounded character. She has Quick and Quiet, Sprint Burst, and Adrenaline. Sprint Burst and Adrenaline are 2 meta perks, which are both incredibly strong. Sprint Burst is the best exhaustion perk, and Adrenaline is extremely good for getting you out of late game situations. And then Quick and Quiet, which is pretty average, but it can be used with a bunch of builds, like Quick and Quiet Life Dance With Me, or like Head On, or like Deception Head On, or anything like that. These are perks you're gonna wanna have on survivors as early as possible because they are all super useful. And that is gonna wrap it up for today's video, but don't click off yet. If you did enjoy it, feel free to drop a like and subscribe down below, and make sure you go down in the comments below and tell me which character you think is the best. Obviously, this list is subjective and it's completely based on my experiences and my playstyle, so do not become disrespectful in the comments because that is cringe. Anyway, guys, that is all I have for you today, so I will see you all in the next one. Peace!